Authentic Parenting is a free resource, and support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Your contribution helps to cover the many costs associated with the production, hosting, and specifically post-production of the show. This is an ad-free show, and we rely solely on your donations. To make a one-time donation now, go to authenticparenting.com/support. Thank you for your kind and generous support. It means the world to me. I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, how to stop freaking out, the kids edition. My guest today is Carla Naumburg. She's a clinical social worker and the author of 5 books, including the best-selling How to Stop Losing Your Shit with Your Kids. If you are listening in real time in September 2024, Carla has a new book coming out for middle grade children ages 8 to 12, and it's called How to Stop Freaking Out, the ultimate guide to keeping cool when life feels chaotic. Carla's writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, CNN, and Mindful magazine, among other places. Carla lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 2 daughters. She's a friend and colleague. She has appeared on the podcast before a couple of times, and I really love her wit, her humor, her realness, and her practical advice for parents. This is her first book for kids, and it's fantastic. It has all of the amazing insights, skills, strategies, and humor of the How to Stop Losing Your Shit with Your Kids, but none of the profanity. The book has fun quizzes, truth bombs, and really beautiful and colorful illustrations. Within these pages, readers will learn what a freak out is and isn't, discover why people flip out when they are stressed, practice keeping cool in the most chaotic moments, and choose one of many strategies for calming down when things are totally overwhelming. She has one big important reminder. You can and will have big, intense, unpleasant feelings. The trick is knowing how to manage them. I really enjoyed reconnecting with Carla and having this conversation, and I hope you will find it helpful. Towards the end, we also talked about why sugar is bad for you, how parenting is hard for everyone, and how we should not make it harder, the role of self-compassion, and much more. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, Carla, I am so pleased to see you again and have you back on the show.
Anna, it's so great to talk to you again. I'm so happy to be here.
And your podcast episodes are always a hit among the listeners.
Oh, I love hearing that.
Yeah, and I always re-release them as best of series.
Best of. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, so you are a beloved guest here. And you have a new book out. Can you tell us the title of your new book and describe how it looks, because it's really different?
Oh, I'm so excited about this book, Anna. This is my first book for kids. It's a middle grade book, which means it's about for kids ages about 8 to 11. And it's called How to Stop Freaking Out, the Ultimate Guide to Keeping Cool When Life Feels Chaotic. And this is with my same awesome publisher, Workman, that did my previous parenting books, like How to Stop Losing Your Shit with Your Kids and You Are Not a Shitty Parent. And the thing I really love about this book is it's full color with a ton of illustrations, because I wanted it to be fun and accessible for kids. So I think it's a pretty fun book to look at, called How to Stop Freaking Out.
Yeah, I love it. I love the colors and the illustrations. They should make books like this for adults with pictures and illustrations.
100% agree. I sometimes, and I love to read, but even me, I sometimes open a book and I feel like I'm just faced with a wall of words. That's how I think about it. And I'm a word person. And even for me, it gets a bit much sometimes. So, one of the things I try to avoid in all my books, but especially my kids' books, is the wall of words. So, lots of illustrations, quizzes, fun facts, all that stuff that kids love.
Yeah, I know this is going to be really well received by kids. I saw the quizzes and stuff. It's so well done and fun, actually, really engaging. So, why are kids freaking out? Or maybe let's start by saying, what is freaking out, anyways? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, I really think of freaking out as a behavior that's tied to certain thoughts and feelings. And the way I think about it is my handy dandy, 11-year-old boy style humor acronym, Anna. We're going to talk about farts, right? So, a freak out, this is my acronym from How to Stop Losing Your Shit with Your Kids. And I think kids would love it too. So, we're using it. So, this is an acronym that will help people figure out if what's going on in the moment is actually a freak out or not. So the F in fart stands for feelings, right? Our freakouts are driven by emotions, whether we realize it or not. So it might be, you know, you're about to start school. You and I are recording this podcast in late August. Lots of us have kids who are about to start school. They might be feeling anxious, scared, worried, overwhelmed, right? And they might realize it and be freaking out all over the place, or they might not realize it and still be freaking out. Or it can be a situation where there's something simmering in the background. Maybe you've got a kid who has a grandparent in the hospital and they're worried about their grandparent, and then they go to school and freak out at a friend, right? So the emotion isn't tied to what's happening at school, but it's still there simmering in the background. So F is for feelings. Our freakouts are driven by our feelings. They're not intellectual or thoughtful. It's not like, a kid walks in the door and thinks to themselves, huh, so happy to be home from school. I think now is a perfect time to totally flip my lid. And actually, it would be kind of awesome if that's how they worked, because then we could just decide not to. But sadly, that's not how it works. Okay, so the A and the R for automatic and reactive. We might be simmering for a while, but at some point, something just flips this switch and it feels pretty automatic that we just kind of lose it. And the reactive means it's generally in reaction to something. And again, we may be aware that, our sibling just dropped down on the couch, stole the remote control, and changed the channel. And so we're reacting to that. Or again, it could be like a math quiz that's in a week that somehow, or getting in our family, anytime somebody knows they're going to have to get a shot, like for a medical reason or whatever, that there's a lot of like worry about that for days at a time. And so it could be in reaction to that. But there's generally something out in the world that I refer to as a trigger that, leads to a freak out. And it also could be something like exhaustion and hunger. If anybody of your listeners have ever, met a kid or spent any time with a kid, or if they're a human or spent any time with other humans, a lot of us do freak out in reaction to exhaustion and hunger. My husband will tell you that I do that all the time. And then the T in fart is for too far. So in my previous book, I used the word toxic, but I felt like that wasn't a kid-friendly word. So what I mean by this is that your feelings-based automatic reaction goes too far. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've got a kid walking their little 2-year, 3-year-old cousin down the sidewalk, and the cousin sees something on the other side of the street and starts to dart out across the street, right? And so your kid goes to grab their baby cousin to pull him out of the street so they don't get hit by a car. So that moment, and maybe they grab him a little too hard. Maybe the kid starts crying. That happens. So in that moment, their behavior was driven by their feelings. They were worried, they were scared, whatever it was. Their behavior was also automatic and reactive. But I would say they didn't go too far. They did this thing to keep the baby cousin safe. It was an intense, maybe a scary moment, but I wouldn't call it a freak out. But then if when they're back on the sidewalk, they start yelling and screaming and, they take off their shoe and throw it, or like totally just lose it because they're so overwhelmed and slam doors and refuse to get in the car, whatever it is, that's probably a freak out, because in that moment, all of a sudden their behavior is going too far. So one of the things I try to help kids parse out in the book, and I have a quiz about this, is, are you just having an unpleasant but appropriate response to a difficult moment, or are you freaking out? But I find that acronym can help folks determine if what's going on is a freak out or not.
Yeah, and it's actually helpful for adults too,
Yes, for all of us, all of us.
for all of us. Yeah. Are kids freaking out a lot these days? I know people write about, mental health crises, the anxious generation, all of those things. And it seems like your book is really timely for this because it offers solutions. So, do children experience a lot of freakouts more than before? And do you think that the pandemic has something to do with that? The pandemic shutdown experience and the isolation and all of that?
Oh, that's so many amazing questions. All right, let me think about this. Kids are freaking out. Kids have freaked out since the beginning of time, right? And there's always been scary things that have happened. So for this generation, for sure, the pandemic and I would think the climate crisis are two majorly scary things that kids worry about. When I was growing up, I don't know if you remember this. So I was born in 1977. When I was a kid, the things we were scared of were being kidnapped. That was a huge thing in the United States in like the 80s and 90s. We were all scared of HIV and AIDS because it was just coming out and people didn't really understand how it was transmitted, what happened. People were scared about that. And I remember the Challenger explosion. I don't remember what I was scared about, but I remember it was really scary and it kind of made me just so aware of the unpredictability of life, right? I remember watching it on live TV in my classroom. But in previous generations, what did they worry about? My grandmother lived through two world wars. My father was very worried that a nuclear bomb was going to drop on him. Also, my father was worried about polio. My grandfather did get polio, and kids were told you can't go in the public swimming pools, right? Because that's where they were going to get polio. So I feel like every generation has always had something to freak out about. Freaking out is a completely normal human reaction that normal human brains do. Now, are things worse these days? I don't know, but here's what I'll tell you. I think social media and access to endless amounts of information online definitely makes things worse for kids and adults because, my daughter was just like randomly scrolling through her social media and all of a sudden she says to us, "What's Mpox? What is this? What's Mpox? Is this something I need to worry about?" Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. What little reading I did online, it seems like it's roughly equivalent to chickenpox, which many of us like. It's a thing you don't really want to get, and you'll probably be fine if you get it. And the way you get it is by rubbing up against people who have it. So it seems way less scary than COVID. But my kid, and by the way, if there are doctors out there who are listening and I'm wrong about any of this, I apologize. I'm not a physician. But my daughter had this automatic reaction that was like, is this going to shut the world down again? Because now that's in her file cabinet of possibilities. And before COVID, none of us thought the world was going to shut down. That wasn't even in my file cabinet of mental possibilities. So I do think that having access to all this constant information does lead to more freakouts with kids and adults. I think we're all sort of this higher baseline level of anxiety, stress, worry, adults and children, that automatically we're all just walking around, I think, a little more triggered. And I think a big part of that is social media. And that makes it a little bit more likely that we're going to freak out.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, kids, we all have access to news, social. I was at the dentist's office just the other day in the waiting room, and I almost got a panic attack because the TV was on and it was a fire in some place, a woman died, the war, this, that, Gaza. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 minutes. But the bombardment of all this negative stuff, it just affected me so much. I had to step out because I don't watch the news. And like in this big bouquet it was thrown at me, it just shook me to the core. And we have access to this, right? You open your Instagram or in any social media, it just spreads so far and you hear the bad news over and over. School shootings, I know, is a big worry for a lot of kids. It's just so unset. The election, it's so unsettling, right?
It's very unsettling. And I have made some really conscious choices around how I use my phone. So, because as many of my readers and folks who know me know, I have anxiety and I have to work pretty hard on a daily basis to manage it. And what does that look like for me? And this is relevant to our kids because I am prone to a freak out because of my anxiety, right? I've already got this simmering level of emotions, and these feelings are one of the thoughts that go with them are one of the prime, feeders for a freak out. And so what do? I get enough sleep. I try to eat a healthy diet. I exercise almost every day. I take my meds. With social media, I have turned off every single notification except text messages and phone calls because I would get these pop-up headlines that would talk about like nationwide crisis, emergency, and then I'd flip out and then it'd be like, this is an opioid crisis. And to be real, the opioid crisis is devastating and scary, but it's not a thing that's a threat to my safety in this moment. But my body was reacting as though it was. And so I've set a lot of limits around my personal news consumption. And I'm working, and I'm going to be really honest, I'm working on setting limits around my social media because you never know when you're scrolling through social media when all of a sudden, you're going to find out that some person from high school you haven't thought about in 20 years died, and then you're really upset for the whole day. Or you find, again, like you were saying, Anna, all this horrible news. It used to be that we only got the horrible news in the nightly news at what, 6 and 10 p.m. And so you could like decide, am I going to sit down and watch the news? And now it's constant. And I think it's constant for kids too, especially kids on phones.
Yeah, I mean, just to conclude this part, I remember when I was a kid, of course, there was war going on. Of course, there were bad things happening in the world. But like you said, first of all, it was limited access to that information. And what I remember is we didn't have access to that. We didn't consume that. Adults did. So there was this division who was consuming that information. I remember hearing adults' conversations, right, discussing the news, the politics. I grew up in the Soviet Union, and like in the late 80s or in the beginning, when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened, there was a lot of conversation in my home, adults conversing, but it didn't affect me because I never saw, or the Chernobyl, any of that. Like I did have knowledge of that information, but I didn't see bombings or Chernobyl. I didn't see graphic images. I didn't consume the information. I just knew that there was something happening in the world. But that's not the case for our kids, unfortunately.
It's not. And I think it's a real gift that your parents gave you to not expose you to all that. And I think it feels like an unsurmountable challenge for parents. So I have two daughters, they're 14 and 15. And, we are the first generation of parents in the history of humanity to contend with our children growing up with literally all the information in the world at their fingertips. And I know that many of us are raised with this idea that more information is better. And I just no longer believe that. I don't believe more information is better. And I think that one of the ways we can work with children to help reduce freakouts is to talk to them about thoughtful consumption of news. And one of the ways I like to give my kids news, and they're too old for this now, but I'm going to share this. And I have no affiliation with what I'm about to share. So I don't get any money. I'm not, but there's a news magazine called The Week. And The Week is a glossy that comes every week. And they basically summarize the news that's happened and tell you what the various outlets have said about the major world events. The Week publishes a magazine called The Week Junior for kids. And so for several years, we got this every week. And I would really try to encourage my kids to read The Week Junior. And they did. They loved it because it shares news in an honest and developmentally appropriate way, which, when your kids are seeing it on social media or on TV, it's not shared for kids. It's not meant for kids, but kids are seeing it. So if parents out there are looking for what I think is a really developmentally appropriate way to share news with their kids that doesn't get them on screens, I love The Week Junior for kids ages, I would say 7 to 11 or 12, depending on your kid.
Interesting. I didn't know about that. So how can kids prevent freakouts?
Yeah, I love talking about this because one of my goals with this book was to really empower children. Not all knowledge is great, but the right knowledge and the right information and skills and strategies can be really empowering. And I don't know about your kid, Anna, but my kids, they don't really want my advice. And they, who among us, when we're freaking out, wants someone to say to us, oh, just relax, you'll be fine. If my husband says that to me, it just sends me into even worse of a spiral and I just lose it even more. And so I really wanted kids to feel empowered to understand what's happening when they freak out and how can they prevent it. And so I talk a lot in the book about triggers, buttons and triggers, which people know from my previous book. So the idea of buttons is that we're covered with, I imagine, these invisible buttons that are powered by our thoughts and our feelings and the things that happen to us. And the more that we're thinking upsetting, confusing, overwhelming, stressful thoughts, the bigger and brighter and more sensitive our buttons get, and they get way more pushable. And, all of us have different triggers, different things that make our buttons big and bright and pushable. So for me, when I'm anxious, my buttons are very pushable. When I'm exhausted, when I'm hungry, exhaustion and hungry are pretty universal. For most people also, when they're in physical pain, that makes your buttons pretty big and bright and pushable, pretty sensitive. And then for other people, there can be other triggers. For example, I have one kid who's super sensitive to loud sirens and loud noises, and one kid who legit doesn't even notice them. And so for one kid, it's a trigger. For another kid, it's not. So we all have our own triggers. And then our buttons get big and bright and sensitive and really pushable. And then something happens and it tries to push our button. Maybe it's, your sibling coming along and whacking you and then walking off, which siblings do. And if you are in a state, right, if you're lit up like a Christmas tree, you might then freak out in response to that. But if you're good, if you're chill, if you're whatever, you might ignore it. Right. So your sibling came along, they tried to push your button, and whether or not they were able to find that button and push it hard enough really depends on you. And so I have a whole list of what I call burps, because I'm here with the classy acronyms, right? So burps are button reduction practices. So these are things we can do in our daily lives, adults and kids, that are going to make those buttons way less sensitive, harder to find, harder to push. Now, in the book, I have the ABCs of button reductions because I wanted to make it easy for kids. And when most people read this book, there's no rocket science in here. There's nothing new under the sun, right? But I want people to start thinking of these things as choices you can make, practices you can do that are going to make it less likely you'll freak out. So the A is for always available. These practices are always an option for you. The B is for breathe. We've all had people tell us to breathe, but stopping for a moment, taking a breath, noticing your breath. It's like sending a text message to your nervous system saying, hey, it's okay. You don't need to freak out. It's okay. You can calm down for a minute. So I've got, A to Z, and it's everything from, getting outside, moving your body, singing a song, connecting with a friend, making sure, you eat something if you're ravenously hungry. Cluck like a chicken, quack like a duck. I find sometimes when I'm about to yell at my kids, if the tension is really strong in my body, I need to get a sound out, right? I got to do something, but I don't want to scream at them. So if I walk around making animal sounds, it feels less toxic and scary, and it kind of breaks up the moment. It makes us all laugh. So what I really recommend for kids is that they look through this list, pick some that look fun and interesting to them. Like, life is hard enough. Let's not make it harder by picking some practice that you hate doing and you never want to do it again. And just try to do them on a regular basis. Try to make it part of your life. And so when you can make this a part of your life, it'll make it less likely that you'll freak out. And if you notice you're heading down the road to a freak out, like if a freak out is imminent, taking that moment to counting to 10, reciting a prayer, reciting a mantra, singing your favorite song, pulling up the Taylor Swift, whatever it is, that will help potentially avoid the freak out. That makes sense? I said a lot there. That was a lot of words.
No, it's nice. I'm smiling because I love your style of the funny, humorous acronyms and all those things. It's so familiar. And that's what I like about you, right?
If we can't laugh at this stuff, Anna, we're just toast. I don't know what else to do besides, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, life is far too serious to be taken seriously. And I feel that way about parenting and life. It's far too serious to be taken seriously.
You have a quiz in the book. I wonder if we can convey part of it or what's in the quiz. I don't know if it will come out through the podcast, but what's your freak out flavor, right? I think that's the quiz. So to help the kids, I like that. It's so empowering. And I don't know if there are any books written for kids this age about freakouts and stuff.
we're starting to see more and more books come out, but really the idea of a self-help book for kids is relatively new. And I feel like it's a big experiment because we'll see if kids are into it. I'm very excited about it. I think they will be because it feels fun to engage with this on your own and not have to listen to an adult talk about it like I'm talking about it now, but other adults love adults. So I have a bunch of quizzes in this book, and the shout out is to my daughters who, when they knew I was writing this book, they were like, Mommy, you got to do quizzes. And I was like, let's do this. So I do have a quiz early on that's helping kids determine what kind of freak out are they most prone to. And the kinds that I sort of narrowed down, and there's a lot of different kinds, are fight, flight, freeze, flip out, and fix. So let me just give an example here. So one of the quiz questions is about a kid whose parents won't let them go to their best friend's sleepover because it's at the same time as grandma's birthday brunch the next day. But the brunch is the next day. And if your kids are anything like my kids, they're like a nightmare after a sleepover. They're just a zombie. They can't function. They're cranky. It's very annoying. So you basically lose like the next 24 hours. So in this question, the parents have just said to the kid, you cannot go to your best friend's sleepover because you got to be up the next day and functional for grandma's birthday brunch. And like all of the kids' friends are going to be there. This is so unfair. So here's the question. Do you, the kid, A, totally glitch out from frustration and anger and forget the entire speech you composed in your head and all the reasons why you should be allowed to go? So the A is totally glitch out. B, snarkily remind your parents that you don't get cranky because of the sleepovers. You get cranky because you have the meanest parents in the history of the universe. C, roll your eyes as you pick up your phone and start scrolling through social media. D, stand in the middle of the living room and scream about how it's not your fault if you don't make any friends and grow up to be the loneliest person who ever lived. E, apologize over and over and over again for every time you've ever been grumpy in the past and fall to your knees begging your parents to let you go, please. Or F, go outside and get some fresh air to calm down. Come back inside and talk to your parents about how important the sleepover is and see if you can find a compromise. So A is glitch out. B is get all snarky with your parents. C is roll your eyes and pick up your phone. D is stand in the middle of the living room and scream. E is apologize and like beg. And F is go outside and get fresh air. So A is freeze. The totally glitch out is freeze. Snarkily remind your parents, that's fight. You're picking a fight with your parents. Rolling your eyes and picking up your phone is actually flight. It's like checking out from the moment. You're not physically running away, but emotionally you're like, I'm done. D is flip out, which is stand in the middle of the living room and scream. And then E is this fixing behavior, which can really, I think there's really a gender difference in this. I see a lot more women and girls doing this, but in the moment, if there's conflict or something, I see occasionally young women and adult women being like, it's okay, fine, I'll just fix it, whatever you want me to do. And there's this real kind of out of control, almost too much push to just make the moment go away. And then F is obviously what we're going for, which is using your burps, your button reduction skills to go outside, get some fresh air, calm down. And I wanted to do this because I wanted kids to be able to start to think about which one of these things would I do so that we can recognize when we're about to freak out. Because when we're about to freak out and when we're in the middle of a freak out, our prefrontal cortex, which is the like noticing awareness, make good choices, don't lose your shit kind of part of our brain, it's actually offline. We don't have access to it during a freak out. And so the better we can get at kind of noticing these things before it all falls apart, then if I'm aware that I'm about to lose it, I can make a different choice. But if I'm not aware. So Anna, which one would you do? What's your freak out style? Because I can tell you mine.
Which one would I do? Not the first one.
So you wouldn't freeze up?
No, I wouldn't freeze up. I think, which one was the one that you make arguments or?
Kind of the snarkily remind your parents. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, me too.
I think I would do that. And my kid would do that for sure.
I'm big with the snark. I would definitely.
I think my kid would do that.
I think my kid would I've got a couple kids who respond differently. I've got one kid who would probably check out.
That's never my kid. My kid would be more aggressive, outwardy.
Yes. I mean, obviously, Anna, I would always 100% of the time go outside, take a deep, no, I wish. And so we have a bunch of different questions in this quiz with different examples. And at the end, kids can really look and see which type they're more likely to be, but also lots of us respond in different ways, because if you're freaking out in response to your parents, that's going to look really different than if you're with a coach or a teacher or a therapist. So I also wanted kids to realize that our freakouts are really context dependent. Like for adults, it's going to look really different if you're with your spouse or your kids or your boss or a colleague, right? So, but most of us do have tendencies that we are more likely to go towards. And I really want kids to get to know their style of freak out. And I'm also trying to normalize freakouts because even though we're trying to get less of them, I also don't want kids to beat themselves up or feel ashamed or embarrassed when it happens because it happens to all of us.
I know. And maybe we can talk about then. Well, I'm glad that you're normalizing it, first of all. That's the feeling that I'm getting. And you're empowering children. I think it's good for kids to have a self-help book like this so that they can learn that this is normal. It happens to everyone. This is my kind of flavor of freak out, that I am normal. There's nothing wrong with me. Because kids of that age have a lot of vulnerabilities around self-identity, right? Self-image, and it's developing. So I think this is empowering for them and they can have fun filling out the quizzes and all. Yeah. And then maybe what could they do after the freak out? That's also a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, this is so important because I feel like in life, adults, kids, everyone, we get all this advice about like, don't lose it, stay calm, relax, be chill. And we all lose our tempers, lose our minds from time to time. And there's like no advice out there for what to do afterwards. So, my advice to kids in any difficult moment is 3 steps: notice, breathe, and burp. And by burp, I mean practice one of your button reduction practices. So, what I mean by noticing is, notice, and you can really do this in any moment. It's a really useful strategy if you're at the beginning of a freak out, mid freak out, end of it, whenever, is noticing is very grounding and it brings us back to the moment and brings us out of this swirl of emotions. So, for example, let's say something is brewing, you're feeling tense, and I walk kids through how to notice all these things. They're tells, right? We all have tells if we're about to freak out. Maybe your shoulders get tense, your stomach starts hurting, your breathing speeds up, or maybe you start getting real snappy. If you notice that happening, just notice it. Just kind of be aware of it. Oh, I am feeling my breathing speed up. Oh, my shoulders are getting tense. If you're in the middle of a freak out, it's a lot harder to notice these sort of subtle things. So, what I say is literally notice anything, notice the wall. When my daughter was quite young and she was freaking out, I used to say, can you find the couch in the room? We'd be sitting on the couch, right? The couch is really obvious. But if you're in the middle of a freak out, your noticing brain is turned off. And so we need to start bringing it back online with really easy things to notice. So you can notice the wall. You can notice the tree next to you. You can notice the sound of the construction down the street. But noticing is just a way to kind of calm down your limbic system, which is the part of your brain that's freaking out. Bring your prefrontal cortex back online a little bit. So that's the first step is I just want a kid to notice something. Like notice that you have a hand. Literally, just look at your hand and notice it. And all of a sudden, your attention isn't on your freak out, right? The next step is to just take a breath. Just breathe for a minute. And again, it's sending that message to your nervous system. It's okay. You're not in danger. You don't need to run away from a bear or muskox or I don't know, whatever people run away from. You're safe. You're okay. Notice, breathe, and then pick a burp, right? What do you need to do? So for me, I love turning on music. A song that I really love will help calm me down and distract me. I love going outside. I love stretching my body, like drinking a tall glass of water. All of these things can help like interrupt the moment and calm you down. And so so the 3-step process is notice, breathe, and burp. And what I recommend kids to do, and adults, honestly, is when you read the list of burps, button reduction practices, take a sticky note or a piece of binder paper and write down the ones that you like. Because in that moment when you're freaking out, your brain isn't going to remember them. But if you have a sticky note, I have a friend who used to put her sticky note on the inside of a kitchen cabinet. And I thought that was brilliant because a lot of us freak out in the kitchen. But for kids, maybe they put it in their backpack, put it in their binder, put it on the back of their phone, like whatever it is, or have an app on your phone. If you're a kid who uses your phone, open an app, open a note, and make your list of things that you can do. So it's notice, breathe, and burp. And that can happen at any time if you're really trying to prevent an active freak out, if you're trying to come out of it the other side. The other thing I say to kids a lot is have compassion for yourself. Try not to beat yourself up. Try to be forgiving of yourself. Try not to feel too ashamed or embarrassed. This happens to all of us. It's really common. It's okay. Feels bad, but it's okay.
Yeah. How about parents? What can we do to help our kids with the freakouts besides not freaking out ourselves and joining in the freak out?
And that, I mean, that's the work, right, Anna? That's like the hard work is not freaking out ourselves. And if you're like my husband, you are a lucky person because he is not triggered by my kids' freakouts. He can stay calm through them. Whereas for me, I have to work quite hard to stay calm when they freak out. It really is a trigger for me. So, what I would say to parents is notice, breathe, and burp. Like, seriously, the goal for parents. So, let's remember that the part of the brain that calms us down during a freakout is our prefrontal cortex. Let's also remember, in not delightful news for parents, that our kids don't have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex until they're in their early 20s. So if you're ever wondering why college kids like to light stuff on fire and throw it out the window, it's because literally the part of their brain that's supposed to say, hey, buddy, don't light stuff on fire and throw it out the window isn't fully working yet. And so sometimes it actually helps me, and this isn't physiologically accurate, but it helps me to look at my daughter and look at that space behind her forehead and imagine like just a black hole. It's not true, but it reminds me that, oh, she literally doesn't have the neurons she needs yet to do this thing in this moment. And the reason I mention this is because in that moment, it's our job as parents to be that prefrontal cortex for our kids, to stay calm and create that calm environment. And then, it's kind of an experiment to see what your kids need. So I've got one kid who generally, for the first 15 years of her life, for the most part, did not love to be hugged and touched as a soothing mechanism. Whereas my other daughter was like all over me. When she was upset, all she wanted was constant physical contact. And just in the past like 6 months, they've started switching on me. So all of a sudden I'm like, what is happening here? You are not doing that thing you've done for 15 years. And it's on me to be flexible and work around that. But noticing, and sometimes you can ask your kid what they need. Do you want a hug? Do you want me to just sit next to you? Do you, and obviously, if you have really little kids, you're just going to kind of try things out because they can't answer those questions yet. And then, assuming their answer is a safe one, you need to respect it. So there were times when I really wanted to hug my kid. That just felt like the response that I wanted to give her. And she really didn't want it. And that was very annoying to me. And I had to respect it. And so if your kid can let you know what they need, and again, it's a safe, appropriate thing. They're not asking to like get the keys to the car when they're 8 years old so they can drive away. We need to just respect it and stay calm.
Yeah, definitely good advice. Well, it's interesting how you said that kids switched on you. That brings me to this question of how have you changed? Have you upgraded your parenting toolkit or as your children became teenagers, right? What have you noticed in yourself? What things have you upgraded your toolkit? I mean, that's the best way I can ask that.
I love that question. I think a couple things have happened. One is that I've upgraded my toolkit, and I'll talk about what that means specifically for me in a second. And the other is parenting is just easier because I like teenagers better than toddlers. We all just sort of, I think most parents tend to have a preference for one age group or another. And I find little kids
Annoying?
boring and annoying. Boring and annoying. I mean, I loved my daughters, but that was not my favorite stage of life. And I actually love teenagers. I love the snark. I love texting them hilarious memes. Like there are definitely some benefits to phones, folks. I love playing cards with them. I really enjoy having teenagers. And I find the challenges of teenagerdom much more interesting and engaging. And the challenges of toddlers just made me want to cry, which I did a lot. So I think that's part of what's changed in parenting. The other part is that the toolkit, I would say, is really about taking care of myself. And I don't mean to be, the dead horse. You can't pour from an empty cup and blah, blah, blah. But it's annoyingly true. It's so true. And so when my kids were little, I had a whopper of a case of postpartum anxiety. And even as a clinical social worker, I didn't realize what was going on for a few years. And when I was really overwhelmed by pretty persistent anxiety, I was tense. I was snappy. I was irritable. I couldn't think creatively about how to solve problems. It was hard for me to be present in the moment. And I was freaking out a lot. And since then, I have learned, how to stop losing your shit with your kids. People often ask me, why did you write that book? And I was like, because I needed it. It was for me fundamentally. But through the work of that book, I came to have a much better understanding of why I was yelling at my kids. And I know now I have to get sleep. Some people can function with less sleep. Sadly, I am not one of them. I have to stupidly exercise every stupid day. And my kids know it. And they'll be like, Mom, did you miss your exercise today? And then I kind of want to slap them because that's annoying, but they're right. I don't slap them. I just think about it, but I don't do it. I have to take my meds. I have to get time outside. And so I think my toolkit is really around this variety of strategies, all of which really are button reduction practices that when I was in college, before I had kids, I didn't really need to do them so consistently and I was fine. But now that I'm a parent, I have to. And then I can show up for my kids more often than not. It's not perfect every moment, right? I still have moments of anxiety. I still have moments when the cat throws up in the middle of the night and it wakes me up and I don't sleep and I'm kind of a cranky mess the next day. But when I do all these things, I am more flexible with my daughters. I'm more understanding. I'm more forgiving. And when there's a problem, I can think more creatively about how to address it. So I think that my parenting toolkit 100% relies on my self care toolkit. And it's extremely annoying because I want to be one of those people who can just drink Diet Cokes all day and stay up all night watching movies and wake up the next day and be fine. And I'm not. I'm not that person anymore. And I just had to accept it.
Yeah, I don't know if that works for anyone. That sounds like a bad combination. In the long term, that's like a, you know, it's gonna affect you. Yeah, I love that. Have your children read your book, this new book? Have they reviewed it? What's
So they are just on the other side of it being, they're a little too old for it. And so the day last spring when we got the first, so the book publishes on September 10th, 2024. And the day last spring when we got the first like test copy of it, the ARC, the advanced reader copy, they picked it up and my in-laws were over for dinner. We're having this nice dinner. The package comes, they tear it open, they pick it up and they just went to town on it, like mocking it relentlessly as teenagers do. And they started reading the quizzes and like hilarious voices and acting it out. And so they've seen the pictures. They love the illustrations. They love to make fun of me for it. I don't know if they've read it because I think they think they're too old for it. They've read parts of my other books, which I think they thought was sort of interesting, but they were like, this is kind of boring. And I pointed out that they were not, in fact, the intended audience for my parenting books. So yes, they've read it and mostly made fun of me for it, which seems developmentally completely spot on for those little turkeys.
Yeah, that sounds appropriate. Yeah.
It was hilarious. They were using all the voices, Anna.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine. If they are anything like you, I can imagine that. What practices, like, what did you discover recently that is interesting? Or maybe it's a practice or like something in this personal development world. Maybe you read something new, discovered some new idea or a practice. I'm curious if you discovered that is.
So there's one I'm grappling with right now that I've known about for a while. And I'm finally starting to maybe sort of take it seriously, even though I really don't want to. I feel like I'm like a hostile witness when it comes to this one. And it's about sugar. So I cut alcohol out of my life a long time ago for a few reasons. One is that one of my parents was an alcoholic when I was growing up, and so it's never really been a big part of my life. And I generally think it tastes horrible, but I like tried to, it's kind of fun every once in a while, I guess, to have a glass of wine. But I realized it really messed with my sleep. And I've become so protective of my sleep that I don't drink alcohol. But the thing I do is eat a lot of sugar. And I love sugar. It brings me joy. It makes me feel good. But as I've been doing more and more research, it really seems like sugar is legitimately not good for us. And I know we've been hearing this since we were kids, but I think it's really not good for us. So I am now on day 4 of no added sugar. And I'm not making a big deal out of this. I'm not like turning my diet upside down or anything, but I'm, usually in the afternoon I would go for some chocolate or something, and I'm just not doing it. So far, I just feel like it makes my life a little bit sadder. That's all I'm experiencing right now. But what I've read is that if you give it a few weeks without added sugar, it can really help with your mood, help clear your thinking, help with sleep. So much to my chagrin, I am trying this. So this is a self-care thing that I'm really trying to level up. I refuse to go the rest of my life without sugar, but I think what I'm going to do is really work to hold sugar retreats for special celebrations. So if we're going out with as a whole family, if it's somebody's birthday, and this is a huge change for me because usually I eat like 2 to 3 cookies or some kind of sugary treat almost every day because I'm probably addicted. And so I would say when it comes to self-care, this is different from a practice per se. And I don't go into this in the book. It's not like take some deep breaths or do 10 jumping jacks, but it is a change I'm trying to make. So that's what I'm working on that I think could help with my mood and my thinking and my sleep.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, and the sadness will go away eventually. I mean,
Oh, I will mourn sugar for the rest of my life, Anna. It will never go away. I will.
no, I
I
get,
might start dressing in black all the time like Johnny Cash.
oh, Maybe you'll be surprised. I mean, I don't have a sweet tooth. So like, let's start with that. I think some people are more prone to eating sweets than others for whatever reason, right? Like I love lemony, soury, salty things.
Oh no.
No? So I would rather eat like pickled vegetables than a cupcake.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you and my husband should hang out and eat your bizarro foods. And
Yes, like that's
I brought him pickle ice cream once.
wow, there is such thing.
Well, not really. I mean, our local ice cream shop had it once as a special, and so I got it for him. And he even admitted it wasn't that good. I think he was, I don't know. It was like vanilla ice cream with pickles. I think that's horrifying, but he was totally psyched to try it. But I think it was not the awesome flavor he was hoping for. But for me, that's like, why would you take something, some beautiful gift from God and stick a pickle in it?
So funny you like I find out very interesting how you say gift from God. I would love to talk to you later at some point when you are over this. So let's say 6 months later about sugar. I think you're gonna change your ideas and relationship to sugar. And like I don't eat sugar, right? I mean, I'm not like a freak. I don't count or anything like that. But I do look at added sugar when I'm buying things. If there is added sugar, it has to be very minimal, like 4 grams of something, right? If it's more than that, I would never eat it. But the difference is because I'm like this, the moment I eat like a birthday cake or I'm in some social company and people are like pushing something and you're like, okay, what the hell? Let me just eat this sweet thing. I have a headache and I battle for at least a couple of days after that. My body accepts sugar as a toxin because I'm not used to eating sugar consistently. The moment I introduce it, even in a small dose, I have a headache the next day. It's just horrible feeling. So like it just sort of you want to avoid that feeling and not eat sugar.
I'm feeling a little hopeless right now.
It's that's what happens to you.
Ah,
No, it's actually it cleanses your body. And then when you introduce, it's like, oh, I don't like this. Get away from me.
that is so hard to imagine, but I would feel amazing if that happened. And I bet I'm going to show up next time and be like, I'm sorry, Anna, I cannot do a podcast with you because now that I'm not eating sugar, I just got awarded the Nobel Prize in writing snarky books because I'm so amazing at my writing. No, not going to happen.
Yeah, I have no doubt your writing is always going to be amazing.
Not
It's
going to
even going to
happen.
get better without sugar. You're not going to, yes, you're going to see the changes that happen the moment sugar is removed. It's like it's incredible changes.
Well, I'm on day 3 and I'm still surprisingly committed to sticking with it. So here we go. My daughter wanted a croissant from the grocery store and I got her one because I didn't mind. And I did not get myself a muffin or anything, which felt like a big win for me.
Yeah, I think after a week you'll notice a difference. After the second week, you will not even like have cravings.
I love this. So that's my leveling up. I'm constantly looking for ways to feel calmer, steadier, to really bring down the sensitivity and how big those buttons are, right? I don't know, I guess I was just born with more buttons than most people. And I mean, these core things I've done around removing alcohol, getting more sleep, exercising every day, those feel really basic and important. And sugar's kind of my next step.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that's so honest, and I think it's important for other people to hear that. It's like when I went off of caffeine, I stopped drinking coffee. That was a self-care act. I drink coffee now, but there were times definitely when I cut that off. I mean, it's hard to be disciplined about a food item when you delete something from your life that you really love. It's hard, but once you get over that initial difficulty, it gets a lot easier.
And that is, so true with any new practice, right? And so, what I want kids to know and adults to know too is any of these self care practices, pick that low hanging fruit first, pick the easy one. So, if you're a kid and you're looking through this list of all my button reduction practices, choose the ones that if you're like, oh, yeah, I love dancing, or I love playing basketball, or I actually already do yoga at school and I love it. Pick the ones that sound easy and fun because there definitely will be some. And if you're like, oh, yoga is the worst and it makes me want to poke my eye out, don't do that. Like, life just cruising along is hard enough as it is. So let's try to make these next steps as easy as possible whenever possible.
Speaking of sugar, do you know how I feel about sugar? Everything I eat that is sweet, they all taste the same to me. Like if I eat a cookie or a cake or anything sweet, it all tastes the same. And I'm like, ew, how do people love this cupcake? How do people love this cookie? For some reason, it all tastes the same.
Isn't that interesting? It all tastes like heaven to me, like just joy in heaven. But, I think actually some of my sugar eating has gotten a little habitual and kind of checked out. But, if my father-in-law makes the most amazing pies and they taste unbelievably delicious. And so that seems worth it. And I think that's a lesson we can all learn is, what's worth it in life? What are the choices we're going to make that are worth it? And what are the times when we just need to say, I know that's a trigger for me and it's not worth it. And I think that's a constant balancing act that, even most of us grown-ups are still, as you and I are discussing, trying to figure out. And so I think what helps a lot is just talking about the challenges of triggers and how normal it is to struggle with them and how normal it is to be imperfect about our struggles and that that's okay. That's part of what it means to be human.
I know. And triggers can come from like all so unexpectedly, right? That's the thing about triggers. Sometimes you can know your triggers, but sometimes they can just come out of nowhere. It's not like you expect them to come at that moment. Uh, a friend of mine just sent me pictures from her trip. She's with her family, her kids are having fun. I'm happy for her, that kind of stuff. But it's like there are days when that kind of message hits you harder than, wow, I don't have a family. I don't have a home to go to. My kid doesn't have grandparents. It's like this awful feeling. Like I didn't expect when I read that message to be so overwhelmed and triggered for a couple of days, but it did affect me. I have to say, even though I was like, I've done so much work, in regards to my wounds and traumas, but there are times when those things like come out of nowhere and you just need to care for yourself compassionately.
Everything you just said is so relatable. And so, sometimes we can predict those triggers. My birthday was this summer and it's a hard day for me because when I was a kid, my birthdays weren't great. And even now, my kids are away from me usually because they go to sleepaway camp. And it's generally a hard, unpleasant day for me. And I just spent the whole day triggered. And in the afternoon, I just had a massive meltdown with my husband. And that often happens on my birthday. And I knew it was going to happen. And I had all these plans with friends and all of these things. And then, as you know, Anne, I got COVID for the first time. My husband and I have somehow managed to avoid it for 4+ years. And so I had to cancel all the scaffolding that I had set up to try to make this a better day for me. I had to cancel all of it because I was sick. And so I was just a triggered mess all day. And it was something I had planned for and did my best to, like, I know I don't like my birthday, going to try to make plans to make it better. The plans fell apart. And so then there are some days when you just say, I just feel crummy. And I looked at my husband, I go, I just want to lay on the couch and watch TV all day. Like that is all I can do. And because my kids were at sleepaway camp, I could do that. And then you wake up the next day and it's a new day. But sometimes these triggered moments do last longer. And I think it happens for kids and it happens for parents. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said all we can do is sort of compassionately take care of ourselves, remind ourselves, okay, I'm having these feelings. I am triggered. There is nothing I can do to fix this. There are times when there are fixes, right? But like your story with your friend's picture, you can't go back and change what happened to your country. You can't go back and change what happened to your family. I can't go back and fix how awful my birthdays were when I was a kid. And so I think all we can say is, yeah, it's one of those days. And can I give myself little treats like a cup of tea or watching this TV show I love or texting with a friend who makes me laugh? And then you just ride the wave. And I think the trick is to try to not make it worse by beating up on yourself. Or, during COVID, I had some friends who I sort of knew in the community but wasn't close to. And they were posting pictures of all the unbelievably incredible home learning they were doing with their kids. And they were like,
I hated those people. Let's just say
oh my
that.
God, they were like professors who were calling in their fellow professors to do like Zoom calls about this and that. And I was like, I think my kid spent all day in her bed reading Garfield, which is like a fat shamey cartoon, right? She spent all day with this stupid cat and fat shaming cartoons. And I finally was like, I have to unfollow this person. And they might notice, they might not notice, but every time I open up Instagram, I'm being triggered by their posts and I can't, like, it's not worth it for me to keep
Retriggering yourself. Yeah.
trying to manage this. Like, because every time I saw a post, I'd have to remind myself, we're all doing different things and our kids are in different places and this is a really hard time, blah, 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 blah. And it would require this like piece of work, emotional work on my end to get myself rebalanced. And finally, I was like, this is stupid. Why don't I just unfollow her? It doesn't mean I don't want to be her friend. It just means I don't want to see her social media posts. That's all it means.
Oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. Like what we're saying. Do you see what we're saying? Like you're saying that there are times when you can get triggered and you can do a little self-care thing and it can go away. There are things where you can just lie down and watch a TV and just ride that wave until it ends. And in this case, instead of doing this hard work, even though you can, why should you do the emotional work of being triggered by this little thing? You can just unfollow and avoid that completely.
Yeah. And
We have so many different ways of being triggered and so many options, and they are all normal. There's no one way.
that was an easy one, right? Because what we're talking about here is setting boundaries, right? And that was an easy boundary because she had so many followers. She's not a super close friend of mine. I don't know if she even noticed. Like, it doesn't matter, right? This doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Right. Even if she noticed, like, who cares?
But there have been times in my life with people who are in my life where I have had to say, I don't want to talk about this thing with you, whether it's politics or something else. I just have to say, I want to be in a relationship with you. I care about you. But when you bring up X, Y, or Z topic, it's really challenging for me and I don't want to talk about it. And so what I try to say is, I'm doing this because I care about our relationship. And oh man, Anna, it's painful. It sucks, right? It sucks to do.
Yeah, I had to do that with a very close person too, because there is a specific topic that always triggers me because their viewpoint is their viewpoint and there's no way I can convince them out of it and vice versa. So it's best not to even go into that water for the sake of the relationship. It's a self-care act for me and it's a respectful act towards them, and we preserve the relationship.
100%. I totally agree with this because what I don't want is this person to continue bringing up this thing. And then I have to like bite my tongue and then go home and drink my glass of water and go for a walk and move my body and do all the work to like calm my nervous system down. Because then I start to feel resentful to them, which fundamentally isn't fair to me and my needs. And it's not fair to them because they might not even realize it if I haven't communicated with them about it. And so I have just said to people, and I always try to frame it as, I'm doing this because I care about you and I care about our relationship, but this one piece of the puzzle is really painful for me. And so I think it's better if that's just not part of our relationship. And the vast majority of the time, I mean, this doesn't happen that often, but when it does, I find that people are usually responsive, and they might be a little sore about it, but I find that most people, when you frame it as, I'm doing this because I care, and they can see that, I'm not talking about a parent spanking a kid and being like, I'm doing this out of love. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But when we're saying, our relationship will legitimately be stronger and easier and more fun and more connected when we just acknowledge that there's one piece of this that we don't share with each other, I think that's cool.
Yeah, I agree.
But man, oh my God, Anna, it's so painful in the moment. Like, let's just acknowledge that I'm saying this, but it's actually a really hard and yucky thing to have to do.
It is. It is. I think that, there are so many hard things we have to, in the moment, it's hard, but then the benefits are easier. I think it's instead of like doing the elongated hard thing, which would be the opposite of that action, I think I rather always am favor of doing the hard thing up front so that it will be easier because I don't want to deal with this and it's always hard. Like, I don't want that. I want this headache right now. I want to solve it instead of having to deal with this over and over and going, oh, no, I don't want that, you know?
I also wonder if it's something about being a woman in a particular stage of life. So as we're recording this, I'm 47 years old.
I'm 50.
And I remember when I went online when I was going to turn 45 or something, and I asked all my women friends on Facebook, like, okay, ladies, what's it like? And they were like, oh my God, it's amazing because you just don't give a shit anymore. Like, you just have so little patience. And it's like this newfound, like, I don't have time for this. And what they didn't mention is that, like, your body hurts all the time and everything falls apart, but that's fine. We'll get over that. And then I heard Terry Gross, who is an NPR interviewer. She does the show Fresh Air, and she was interviewing some author, some woman. I'm sorry to report, I don't recall her name, but this woman had written a book about Mary Pfeiffer was her name. And she wrote Reviving Ophelia, which many of us remember from a long time ago. And she's written a new book, but this conversation was probably 5, 10 years ago, about aging. And what she said about being an older woman is that she's just willing to walk away from the conversation she doesn't want to have. The minute I heard that, I was like, well, that's a pretty privileged perspective because it's not like people of color can walk away from the racist conversations. I mean, they can in the moment, but racism still affects them. But when I let go of that little indignant social worker part of me, I was like, oh my gosh, what would it be like as a woman raising daughters, as I know you're raising a daughter, to be like, you don't have to show up to every conversation you are invited to. And that's a little bit what this social media stuff feels like, is someone inviting me to a conversation and I can choose, do I want this one or not? And I think when I was younger, I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted friends. And now I'm like, peace out. What I want is like this little band of people in my life who I'm close to and who really are worth my time and energy. And I'm not going to be rude to you. I'm not going to be mean to you, but I'm going to step away from this conversation. And that feels really, I've remembered that recording for a long time, that conversation. And it really stuck with me about, like, especially for all of us, but for as women raising daughters, it feels really important to me. Like, I don't ever want you to be rude or disrespectful to people. And that includes yourself, right? I don't want you to be rude or disrespectful to yourself. And sometimes you can just leave a conversation and the other person might be a little unhappy, and that's okay. They can be a little unhappy.
Yeah. Not worrying or caring about the other people's feelings by abandoning yourself. Like that was the default, like we've all learned, right? To please others and never care about your needs or wishes or feelings. It's all about that. Going back to your quiz, one of the options was it to fix the situations? That's right. That is part of it. Like not to avoid the discomfort, taking charge of making. As moms do that a lot, right? Yeah, women do this a lot. We were programmed to do that, but I think breaking that is so important and empowering for our kids.
100%. And I feel like one of the hardest and most important parts of parenting is learning to tolerate our children's discomfort, letting our kids be uncomfortable, letting them be sad, letting them be anxious, letting them be scared, as long as we know they're safe, right? It's really important that we're keeping them physically safe and emotionally safe. And that's a very hard line to draw. And I just said this thing is like, it's so easy. It's really the work of parenting. And I know that it's really hard for when my kids are struggling, that often actually what I'll say is if it's a really hard moment and I know they need to struggle, is I'll say to my husband, I need you to manage this one because my urge to step in and fix is so strong and that's not what they need right now. And he doesn't have that urge in the same way I do. He's not a monster. He's not a psychopath. He can just tolerate it better. And so he does a better job tolerating those moments. And so it's a constant practice for me because I think it's really important for my kids to know that they can feel really uncomfortable, awful feelings and they're going to be okay. Feelings come and go, right? They're not forever. They don't define us. And a lot of us make unskillful choices in order to avoid unpleasant feelings, right? We make the wrong choice because we don't want it to feel bad right now. And I want my kids to learn, and I am constantly learning, right? This is like the work of being a human, that I can feel bad and it's okay.
I've been thinking about recently what are important skills like I want to impart to my kid or in general for parenting. And I distilled it to two skills. As I work with adults, people, parents, what do I see most people struggle with is this inability to be with difficult feelings, discomfort, tolerate discomfort, and face or deal with change, loss. Those two areas are the hardest things for people. And so if I were to give two pieces of advice to people, what are the skills that you can give your children the gifts is those two things. Help them tolerate, be with their difficult feelings, not to fix, not to distract, not to do anything to make it more pleasant. Let them experience, because as they are young, the stakes are so low and they get so much practice with that. When they get older, they already have the capacity and they are more resilient. They have that feedback about themselves that I'm capable, I'm resilient, I can do this. But if we prevent, all we give them is anxiety. And another thing is the change, helping them face change, deal with change, cope with change, that change is normal, because there's always loss with change, right? We lose something, transforms into something else. Can we develop, a capacity to be with change? Because I see that's the hardest thing that people face when maybe I know someone who is 39, had a really good life and a childhood, no big traumas or things like that. And now she got a divorce. And this is so unstable and destabilizing and a horrific experience. And she's not ready for that. But we need that practice ground. And childhood and, young adult years is that time to normalize the experience of change and help our children to come out the other way of a negative feeling, of a loss, of an experience, so that they can have more capacity to deal with that and be resilient as a result and believe in themselves. That's the biggest gift we can give, because we're not going to be there. If we prevent and solve and fix, make things disappear, the problems, the obstacles, give them what they need, or prevent bad things from happening so that they can be always happy, what are we doing? Incapacitating our kids? Like, that's awful.
And the example that I totally agree with everything you said. The example I often give is that so when I was 14 years old, my father sent me on like a student travel trip off to Spain for a few weeks. And on the way back, all of my flights were disrupted. And I ended up spending the night. It was my birthday. This was one of my many crappy birthdays, alone in a Howard Johnson's outside of Chicago, 14 years old. And this was not the first time I'd had a crazy travel experience where plans went awry and I was, so I'm 14, not my first crazy travel experience. And it sucked. I'm not going to lie. It sucked. I was unhappy. It was a bummer. And now I will tell you, Anna, travel doesn't stress me out. You know, flights that get delayed, they don't stress me out. Flights that get canceled, sitting in an airport, I know I can handle it because I've dealt with a lot of crazy travel stuff. And it's just an example where I don't know a single parent who's like, yes, I would be 100% cool with my 14-year-old daughter all alone outside Chicago, spending the night in Howard Johnson's without a cell phone because those didn't exist back then. I would be freaking out right now. And yet it turned out to be this total gift because it sort of gave me this armor about this issue of traveling that a lot of people get really stressed out. And I'm like, we have to spend the night somewhere. We'll be fine. It'll be fine. Like, it's annoying. I don't want it, but I can handle it. And there are a lot of areas of life coming from a dysfunctional childhood with divorce and alcoholism and mental illness that are much harder for me because of my childhood. Let's be real. But there are certain areas of my life where I'm like, I grew up handling this and I can handle it. And so that's not to say that I want parents to manufacture like challenges for their kids. No, thank you. Life will hand them to you. But it is to say that when these challenges happen, let your kids go out in the world and experience them. So like, if your kid goes off to school and has forgotten something, let them forget it. Like, teach your kid to pack their own backpack. And then if they forget something, let them forget it. Because the kid will then learn how to pack their own backpack because they will learn, in the most visceral, memorable way possible what happens when they forget something. And they'll also know that you can forget something and still be okay. Whereas if you send a kid off to college and every single day of their life, you have always shown up with this thing that they forgot, and then they go to college and they start forgetting things because they've never had to remember, that's going to be a really rough transition, And so my kid will say, I want to walk into town. We live in a safe neighborhood. This is safe. And I'll be like, okay, go. You've got a phone. You've got a map. Like, you're 15. Go. And, when you're 13, whatever age is. And there are times when she's gotten lost. And there are times when she's forgotten stuff. And there are times when she came home with an ice cream in her backpack and learned you can't really put an ice cream in your backpack. This is good stuff, right? And so to parents but I think it's very hard to do this because when parents are feeling anxious, we don't want to let our kids take these risks. But good enough mothering good enough parenting is a phrase in psychology, social work, where we talk about when we fail our kids in manageable ways and they suffer as a result because we made the wrong macaroni and cheese, or we forgot to, we were 20 minutes late picking them up, or, we didn't snow plow, helicopter, whatever them, and things weren't pleasant for them. We weren't perfect parents. This is actually really good because it teaches our kids that things can go awry, things can fall apart. They might not get what they want and they'll be okay. And that is not the predominant message of our parenting generation. And I feel like it's a really important one.
Yeah, I agree. It is not. I mean, those manageable hardships make children hardy, right? We want them to be resilient, capable, to come out of an experience and say, I am capable of handling things. I think that's why children are more anxious these days, because they don't have that experience. But perfect, quote unquote, parents, the gentle parents, always prevented every little misstep, mishap, and the children's lives were perfectly curated and presented, and boom, you didn't make the swim team, it's like a tragedy, and the parent makes phone calls and changes that for the kid. Like, that's not good. That's not going to help. Let your children experience the consequences of life events with your support. I mean, that's another important thing. It's not like, we're saying neglect your kids, but most of their experiences are child-sized, teenage-sized for their age. Let's face it. I mean, what do our children face? They're not.
If we're lucky, right?
If we're lucky. I mean, we live in the United States. Can we allow them to have those experiences so that they can grow? Because, yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge that for parents, I want to cut parents some slack too, because I believe that parents are being raised in a culture where they're led to believe that if we do all the right things as parents, our kids will be okay. And if our kids are not okay, it's because we've done something wrong. And this is 100% bullshit. We can do all the right things as parents and our kids might still really struggle and suffer. And if our kids are struggling and suffer, it doesn't mean we've done something wrong. It's the unpredictability of parenting is brutal. And parents have so little societal, cultural support, a lot of things have changed. And I think it's always been hard to be a parent. Let's not joke around. Like, I'm not saying we have it harder now, but I just want to acknowledge that right now it is very hard to be a parent. And especially for moms, it's a no-win situation because you give your kid the freedom they need and then there's a bad outcome and you get blamed for it. And you don't give your kid the freedom they need and then they struggle and you get blamed for it. So I hope parents come away from this conversation feeling supported and empowered and also acknowledging that there are parents out there who are raising kids with all sorts of limitations and difficulties and challenges. And also acknowledging that if you are a parent of a kid who is in any way not a white, straight, cis, Christian, able-bodied child, you are dealing with challenges that white, straight, cis, Christian, able-bodied people in this country don't always recognize. And I just want to, I've had conversations with my friends I have a couple friends that I talk about this with, and one of them is Black, and I'll make these statements that I, as a white woman, think seem quite reasonable, and she will immediately point out where I'm wrong. And I'm like, oh yeah, you are 100% right. Like, I've never walked through this country with brown skin, and it never occurred to me that that's what would happen, and I'm sorry. So I know you have a diverse listenership, Anna, and I just want to acknowledge that privilege is part of this conversation. And I think about that too. And also parenting is really freaking hard.
Well said. Thank you.
Tagline, parenting is hard. That's my next book. Parenting is really freaking hard.
But let's not make it harder.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's the subtitle. That's the subtitle.
Let's do it, Anna. Let's write that book. That would be amazing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presence. I'm glad we had this time. Thank you for writing this wonderful book. And I can't wait to talk to you about cutting sugar and what it's like. And there's a film called That Sugar Film. Have you seen that movie? It's a documentary.
No, it's going to make me sad and angry. I'm not going to watch it.
No, it's not. It's an experiment. This person does an experiment eats sugar, like 23 grams of sugar, which is the recommended dose per day, and what happens to him in, I think, 30 days or something. And it's like an personal journal style documentary. This was done a few years ago, but it's like kind of interesting what he goes through and the changes he describes happen to his body, to his mind, and everything.
Okay, maybe if I need a hit of inspiration, it sounds like it might be useful.
It's kind of, yeah, I think it's inspiring if you want to cut sugar.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Yes, you got this. Listen, you've done harder things.
But have I? But really? I mean, yes, I've birthed children and survived a night at a Howard Johnson's outside Chicago, but really, in all seriousness, Anna, I just want to thank you for all of everything you do for parents, everything you do for the parenting community, and for having me on this podcast. I'm very grateful for it, and for you.
Until next time, Carla.
Until next time, when I am sugar-free superwoman, or just I come on the podcast with a face smeared with chocolate because I've fallen off the wagon. We don't know which it'll be. It'll be very exciting.
Hopefully you can write a book about it. Maybe if you frame it that you're doing this for writing a book, this would be your next experimental book, personal experiment, and you can share the results.
I left sugar and now I'm sad. That's the title of the book. I gave up sugar and now I'm sad. Thanks, Anna.
Yes, take care. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did and found it useful. Carla is simply amazing. She has real, down-to-earth, practical advice for parents and now for children. I am curious, what are your takeaways from this conversation? Also, what's your relationship with sugar? I love hearing from you. I always welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me an audio message. If you want to connect with your fellow listeners, engage in meaningful conversations about the show, get support and answers to your parenting questions, join the Authentic Parenting community on Facebook, a private support group for parents like you. Please take a moment to rate the show and write a review on the platform of your choice. And if you enjoy the podcast and find it helpful, be sure to make a one-time or monthly donation. Join other members who believe and support the work of authentic parenting. Your contribution makes a difference. Be sure to hit that follow button to never miss a new episode. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Sewell. Thank you so much for listening.